Welcome to Sinister States.
I never thought a simple favor would turn into the most terrifying experience of my life. It started innocently enough, an opportunity to house sit for a stranger while they were away on vacation. I needed the money, and the job seemed straightforward. Water the plants, feed the cat, and keep an eye on the place. What could possibly go wrong? The house was in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows each other, and the streets are lined with old trees that cast long shadows in the evening. When I first arrived, the sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp earth, a scent that should have been comforting but somehow felt ominous. The owner, a man named Mr. Caldwell, had been polite but distant on the phone. He gave me a quick tour, pointing out the security system, the cat's feeding schedule, and the location of the spare key. His eyes never quite met mine, and there was a stiffness in his voice that made me uneasy. Still, I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just a private person. The house itself was beautiful, an old Victorian with creaky wooden floors, high ceilings, and stained glass windows that caught the fading light. It had character, but also a sense of age and neglect. Dust motes floated in the air, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the corners. I set my bags down and took a deep breath, telling myself this was just a job. That first night, I settled in quickly. I fed the cat, watered the plants, and made myself a cup of tea in the kitchen. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but the static on the screen seemed louder than the dialogue, and every creak of the house made me jump. Around midnight, I heard it, a soft tapping at the window. My heart leapt into my throat. I froze, staring at the dark glass. The tapping came again, slow and deliberate. I told myself it was just a branch brushing against the pane, but the sound was too rhythmic, too purposeful that I got up and pulled back the curtain. Nothing, just the empty street bathed in moonlight. I laughed nervously and went back to the couch, but the unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next day, I explored the house more thoroughly. There were rooms I hadn't seen the night before, an attic filled with old trunks and faded photographs, a basement with a locked door that Mr. Caldwell hadn't mentioned. Curiosity gnawed at me, but I respected the boundaries he'd set. That afternoon, I received a text from Mr. Caldwell. "Everything okay? Remember, don't open the basement door." The message was simple but carried an unspoken warning. I didn't reply as the days passed. Strange things began to happen. Doors I was sure I'd closed were open when I returned to a room. Lights flickered without explanation. The cat, usually calm and affectionate, hissed at empty corners and refused to enter certain rooms. One evening, I found a note slipped under the front door. It was written in shaky handwriting. "Leave now. You're not safe." My blood ran cold. I checked the locks and windows, all secure. I wanted to call Mr. Caldwell, but my phone had no signal. That night, the tapping returned, louder and more insistent. I sat in the dark living room, clutching a flashlight, every nerve on edge. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the hallway. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The cat hissed again, arching its back that I summoned every ounce of courage and followed the shadow down the hall. It led me to the basement door. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, but I remembered the warning. I pulled back and retreated to the safety of the living room. Sleep was impossible. Every creak, every whisper of wind set my heart racing. I felt trapped, isolated in a house that seemed alive with secrets. The next morning, I found the note again, this time on the kitchen table. "They're watching. Don't trust the house." Panic surged through me. Who were they? What did the house want? I decided to leave, but when I tried the front door, it wouldn't budge. The locks were jammed, and the windows were sealed shut. I was trapped. Hours passed. The house seemed to close in around me. Shadows lengthened and twisted, and the air grew thick with a suffocating presence. I heard whispers, faint and unintelligible, coming from the walls. Desperation drove me to the basement door again. This time, I found a key taped to the underside of the doorknob. With shaking hands, I unlocked it and descended into the darkness. The basement was cold and damp, filled with old furniture covered in sheets and boxes stacked haphazardly. At the far end, a small door led to a hidden room. Inside, I found a collection of photographs, faces of people I didn't recognize, all with eyes scratched out. A chill ran down my spine. I realized these were previous house sitters, victims of something sinister. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I was plunged into darkness, the whispers growing louder, surrounding me. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen was dead. The flashlight flickered and died. I was alone, trapped, and utterly terrified. Then, a voice whispered in my ear, cold and cruel, "Welcome home." I scrambled against the cold, damp wall, my breath shallow and rapid. The darkness was suffocating, pressing in on me like a living thing. My fingers brushed against something rough, an old wooden crate. Maybe. I tried to steady my racing heart, telling myself to think clearly. Panic wouldn't help me now. The voice echoed again, this time from all around me, a chorus of whispers that seemed to seep from the very walls. "Welcome home, welcome home." It was a chant, low and hypnotic, pulling me deeper into a trance I fought desperately to resist. I forced myself to stand, hands outstretched, groping blindly for the door. My fingers found the cold metal of the latch, but it wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, but it was locked tight. I was trapped. Suddenly, a faint light flickered in the corner of the room. I turned toward it, heart pounding. A small candle, its flame wavering, sat atop a dusty table. Next to it lay a leather-bound book, its cover cracked and worn. I hesitated, then reached out and opened it. The pages were filled with strange symbols and handwritten notes, some in a language I didn't recognize. But one passage was in English, scrawled hastily asterisk, "The house feeds on fear. It traps the unwary, binding them to its walls. Only those who face the darkness within can hope to escape." Asterisk. A shiver ran down my spine. Was this some kind of warning? Or a curse? I closed the book and looked around, searching for anything that might help me. My eyes caught a glint beneath a pile of old newspapers. I pulled them aside and found a rusted key. Hope surged through me. I rushed to the door and tried the key. It fit perfectly. With a click, the door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading up to the main floor that I climbed quickly, desperate to escape the basement's oppressive gloom. When I reached the top, I paused, listening. The house was silent, but the air was thick with tension. I moved cautiously through the hallway, every creak of the floorboards echoing like a gunshot. The cat appeared suddenly, brushing against my legs, its fur standing on end. It looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. I scooped it up, whispering soothing words. We needed to get out of here. I made my way to the front door, fumbling with the locks. They clicked open, and I stepped outside into the cool night air. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows across the yard. But as I turned to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. I spun around, but no one was there. The cold wind swept through the trees, carrying a faint, mournful whisper. "You can't leave. Not yet." I ran to my car, the cat clutched tightly in my arms. The engine roared to life, and I sped away from the house, the shadows seeming to reach out after me. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Strange things happened, lights flickering in my apartment, objects moving on their own, and that same whispering voice echoing in my dreams. I tried to tell friends, but they dismissed it as stress or imagination. Even I began to doubt myself. Then, one night, I received a package at my door. No return address, just a single note inside asterisk. The house remembers. It waits. Asterisk. I knew then that whatever I had escaped was not finished with me. The note's words echoed in my mind as I sat on the edge of my bed, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling slightly. The house remembers. It waits. What did that mean? Was it a threat? A warning? Or something far worse? I tried to push the fear aside, telling myself it was just some sick joke. But deep down, I knew better. The house wasn't just a building. It was something alive, something that had latched onto me, and it wasn't going to let go. Sleep was elusive that night. Every creak of the old apartment building sounded like footsteps creeping closer. Every gust of wind rattling the window panes felt like a whisper calling my name. I lay awake, eyes wide open, heart pounding in the silence. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences only intensified. Objects shifted places when I wasn't looking. The cat, once a comforting presence, became skittish and withdrawn, often staring at empty corners with wide, unblinking eyes. I began to dread the nights, knowing the whispers would return, growing louder, more insistent. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, the lights flickered violently before plunging the room into darkness. The cat hissed and bolted under the couch. I fumbled for my phone, the screen illuminating the room with a pale blue glow. That's when I saw it, a message notification from an unknown number. Asterisk, you can't run from what's inside. Asterisk, my blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, unable to move. The message was simple, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken horrors that I tried calling the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. No one answered. The next day, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed answers. I started researching the house, digging through old newspapers, public records, anything that might shed light on what I had experienced. What I found was chilling. The house had a dark history, stretching back over a century. It had been built by a man named Elias Caldwell, a reclusive figure rumored to have dabbled in occult practices. Over the years, several occupants had vanished without a trace, their disappearances shrouded in mystery. Local legends spoke of a curse, a malevolent spirit bound to the house, feeding on the fear and despair of those who entered. Some said the house was a gateway, a trap set by something ancient and hungry. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read the accounts. It was as if the house itself was alive, a predator waiting patiently for its next victim. Determined to confront the nightmare, I reached out to a paranormal investigator named Claire, someone with experience in dealing with haunted locations. She agreed to meet me and examine the house, hoping to uncover the truth. When Claire arrived, she was calm and professional, her presence a balm to my frayed nerves. We drove out to the house together, the sun setting behind us, casting long shadows over the landscape. The house looked even more imposing in the fading light. Its windows stared like dark eyes, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a mournful song. Claire set up her equipment, EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and audio recorders, while I recounted my experiences. She listened intently, nodding thoughtfully. "This place is saturated with energy," she said finally. "Whatever's here, it's been feeding off the fear and pain for a long time." We spent the night in the house, moving from room to room, recording every sound, every flicker of light. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching us. Around midnight, the temperature dropped sharply. Our breath became visible in the air, and the cat hissed, retreating to a corner. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. In the pitch black, a low, guttural growl echoed through the halls. Claire's voice was steady but urgent. "Stay close." We moved cautiously toward the source of the sound, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The growling grew louder, more menacing, until it was joined by a chorus of whispers, voices overlapping in a cacophony of despair. In the basement, we found the hidden room. The door was ajar, revealing the same collection of photographs I had seen before, faces with eyes scratched out, frozen in silent terror. Claire shone her flashlight on the walls, revealing strange symbols etched into the wood. She took photos and notes, her expression grim. "This is a place of binding," she said. "Someone tried to trap whatever's here, but it's still hungry." As we prepared to leave, a sudden force slammed the door shut behind us. We were trapped. Panic surged through me, but Claire remained calm. She pulled out a small vial of salt and began to sprinkle it along the edges of the door. "Salt is a barrier," she explained. "It can hold spirits at bay, but only for so long." The growling and whispers intensified, pressing against the barrier like a tide. We held our breath, waiting for the storm to pass. After what felt like hours, the sounds faded, and the door creaked open. We escaped into the night, the house looming behind us like a dark sentinel. In the days that followed, Claire and I worked together to uncover more about the house's past. We discovered records of a cult that had once operated in the area, performing rituals to summon and bind dark entities. The house had been their epicenter, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. I realized then that my experience was part of something much larger, a web of darkness that stretched beyond the walls of that old Victorian. Despite the danger, I felt a strange pull toward the house, a need to understand and confront the evil within. With Claire's help, I began preparing for a final confrontation, gathering protective charms, researching ancient rites, and steel myself for what lay ahead. The house was waiting, and I knew I couldn't run forever. The night I decided to return to the house alone, the air was thick with anticipation and dread. I packed a small bag with essentials, a flashlight, a notebook, a camera, and the protective charms Claire had given me. My hands trembled as I locked my apartment door behind me, the weight of what I was about to face pressing down on my chest. Driving out to the house, the familiar streets seemed darker, more foreboding. The trees loomed like silent watchers, their branches clawing at the sky. When I pulled up to the driveway, the house stood silent and still, its windows like empty eyes staring into the night. That I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath my feet. The cat, which had been my only companion through this ordeal, was nowhere to be seen. A cold wind swept through the yard, carrying with it the faint scent of decay and something metallic. I hesitated at the front door, my fingers brushing against the cold brass handle. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. The house greeted me with a musty breath, the air thick with dust and memories. Inside, the silence was oppressive. I moved cautiously through the rooms, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows shifting and twisting at the edges of my vision. I made my way to the basement door, the spot where the house's darkest secrets lay hidden. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. I pushed it open and descended the creaking stairs, the air growing colder with each step. To the bottom, the hidden room awaited. The photographs on the walls seemed to watch me, their scratched-out eyes a silent accusation. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stepped inside. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, pounding on the wood, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, swirling around me like a storm. I clutched the protective charms Claire had given me, whispering the incantations she taught me. The air shimmered, and for a moment, the whispers faltered. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. His presence was suffocating, a darkness that seemed to drain the light from the room. "You shouldn't have come back," he hissed, his voice like the scraping of nails on stone. I stood my ground, reciting the protective words, feeling a warmth spread through me. The figure recoiled, snarling in frustration. "You cannot banish what is bound," he spat. "The house is mine, and so are you." The room trembled, the walls closing in. I felt the weight of centuries pressing down on me, the house itself alive with malevolence. Desperation fueled me. I grabbed the leather-bound book I had found before and flipped to the passage about breaking the binding. With trembling hands, I read aloud the ancient words, the language strange and guttural. The air crackled, and the figure screamed, dissolving into a cloud of black smoke. The door creaked open, and I stumbled out, gasping for air. The house seemed to sigh, the oppressive weight lifting that I fled into the night. The first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon, in the days that followed, the strange occurrences ceased. The cat returned, calm and affectionate. The house, though still old and creaky, no longer felt like a prison that I knew the darkness was not gone forever, but for now, I had one. The relief I felt in the days after escaping the house was profound, but it was tinged with a lingering unease. I knew the darkness I had confronted was ancient and cunning, and while I had managed to break its immediate hold, the scars it left on me were deep. I tried to return to a semblance of normal life. I went back to work, reconnected with friends, and even started to feel hopeful again. "Hello," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. A low, distorted voice replied, "You think it's over?" The house remembers. It waits. The line went dead that I dropped the phone, my heart pounding. The nightmare was far from over. Determined to understand what I was truly up against, I reached out to Claire again. She agreed to meet me and help unravel the mystery that still clung to me like a shadow. Together, we pored over the old book, the photographs, and the notes I had collected. Claire's expertise in the paranormal was invaluable, and her calm presence steadied me that we discovered that the house was built on a site of ancient power, a crossroads between worlds. The cult that had once inhabited it had attempted to harness this power, binding a malevolent entity to the house. The entity fed on fear and despair, growing stronger with each victim. The binding ritual was incomplete, leaving a crack through which the darkness could seep. Our goal was clear: to complete the ritual and seal the entity away forever. We prepared meticulously, gathering rare herbs, candles, and symbols of protection. Claire taught me the rites, the chants, and the meditations needed to confront the darkness. The night of the ritual arrived. We returned to the house, the air heavy with anticipation. Inside, the house seemed to pulse with energy. Shadows danced on the walls, and the temperature dropped sharply. We moved to the basement, the epicenter of the entity's power. The hidden room awaited, its walls lined with the haunting photographs. Claire began the ritual, her voice steady and commanding. I followed her lead, reciting the ancient words. The entity manifested, a swirling mass of darkness and rage. It lashed out, trying to break our concentration. The room shook, and the walls seemed to bleed shadows. I felt the entity's hatred, its hunger, but we held firm, the protective charms glowing with an ethereal light. The house exhaled, the oppressive weight lifting. We emerged into the dawn, exhausted but victorious. The house was free. In the weeks that followed, the house seemed to breathe a new kind of life. The oppressive darkness that had once clung to every corner was gone, replaced by a quiet stillness that felt almost peaceful. I visited the property one last time, standing on the porch as the morning sun warmed my face. The air smelled fresher, the shadows less menacing, but even as I felt relief, a part of me remained wary. The house had been a vessel for something ancient and malevolent, and while we had sealed it away, I knew that darkness never truly dies, it only waits. Back in my apartment, life slowly returned to normal. The cat, once a frightened and skittish creature, now curled contentedly on my lap. The nightmares that had plagued my sleep faded, replaced by dreams of light and warmth. I began to rebuild the pieces of my life that the house had shattered. Yet, the experience left an indelible mark on me. I found myself drawn to the study of the paranormal, eager to understand the forces that lurk just beyond the veil of our reality. Claire and I stayed in touch, sharing stories and discoveries, bound by the shared ordeal that had changed us both. One evening, as I sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I received a letter. The envelope was old-fashioned, sealed with wax, and bore no return address. My hands trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded the parchment inside. The message was brief but chilling. Asterisk, the darkness sleeps, but it never forgets. Beware the shadows that linger in the corners of your mind. The house watches and it waits. Asterisk, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The past was not done with me yet. I tucked the letter away, determined not to let fear control me. I had faced the darkness and survived. Whatever came next, I would be ready. Looking back, I realized that my terrifying experience house-sitting for a stranger was more than just a brush with the supernatural. It was a journey into the unknown, a test of courage and resilience. It taught me that some places carry the weight of history and pain, and that the shadows we fear often have roots deeper than we can imagine. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Sometimes, the scariest things are the ones we can't see, lurking just beyond the edge of perception. And if you ever find yourself asked to watch over a place that carries a dark past, remember, some doors are better left unopened. Thank you for listening to my story. Stay safe and beware the shadows.